More than 450 kilometers from the mainland in the middle of the vast Indian Ocean, there is an island so small that you can walk around it in just 1 hour. No trees, no streams, not a single person, just a bare sandbank in the middle of the ocean. Seemingly nothing worth mentioning. Yet more than 260 years ago, this place that no one bothered to pay attention to hid a horrifying survival story, a tragedy buried for centuries, and a stain that has never been cleansed in human history. That is where more than 60 people were left behind. Not a word of farewell, not a ray of hope, and no one returned as promised. They were not sailors, nor were they criminals. They were slaves, bought, sold, used, and then discarded like damaged goods. However, what no one expected, they survived for 15 years on an island where even birds would have difficulty staying for long. Why were they abandoned? How did they survive the storms, hunger, and utter oblivion? And what has brought modern scientists back to this place after more than 2 centuries, just to find clues to a hidden past? Let's find out right away. In the middle of the deep blue Indian Ocean, about 450 kilometers east of the coast of Madagascar, there exists a tiny island called Tromelin. If you don't look closely, you might easily pass it by on the map. With an area of less than 1 kilometer brassen, a length of only about 1.7 kilometers, and a width of less than 700 meters, Tromelin has nothing but sand wind and a terrifyingly dry space. This is not a place where humans can live, let alone survive for long. However, this desolate, barren, and silent place once held a group of people for 15 years. No one came to save, no one cared, no signs of survival. The island is only about 8 kilometers above sea level. No forest, no big trees, no rivers, not even a natural freshwater stream. Tromelin is battered by tropical storms every year, especially between October and May. It is not only a land abandoned by nature, it is also a hell for anyone who stumbles upon it. Yet in 1761, a shipwreck left this place a living grave for dozens of people, opening one of the darkest chapters in French colonial history. The story begins with a man named Jean de Lafargue, captain of the ship Utile, and also the one who sparked the whole tragedy. At the time, he was conducting a slave trade, which was illegal in many areas around Madagascar. But because the profit was so attractive, Lafargue decided to take the risk. He bought 160 black slaves from the east coast of Madagascar, planning to transport them to the islands of Rodrigues and Mauritius, where he would sell them for double the price. The Utile was chartered to transport the slaves and 141 French sailors. Fearing detection as the local government had banned the slave trade at the time, Lafargue did not choose the shortest, straightest route. Instead, he deliberately took a detour north, extending the journey by more than 500 kilometers to avoid inspection. Despite the crew's warnings that the area was prone to strong winds and dangerous reefs, Lafargue ignored them all, because in his mind, the only thing that mattered was money. And then tragedy struck. Just 9 days after setting off on July 31st, 1761, the Utile crashed into a coral reef and was quickly torn apart by the fierce waves. The ship was destroyed and everything sank to the bottom of the ocean. While the crew tried to escape, most of the 160 slaves locked in the hold had no chance of survival. They were not unlocked. They were not rescued. Nearly half of the slaves drowned in the hold of the ship. A cold, cruel death that is completely unrecorded in many documents of the time. In the end, only 123 sailors and about 60 slaves survived, washed up on a deserted island, Tromelin, a place with absolutely no conditions for living. And from here, the fierce survival began. Captain Lafargue, the person in charge after the shipwreck, was so shocked that he lost the ability to command, completely silent and withdrawn. All control fell into the hands of the second-in-command Castellan, a man who would later play a very important role in the rescue effort. Under Castellan's direction, the survivors began to set up a temporary camp on Tromelin. They set up tents, dug a well for water, and started building a new ship from the wreckage of the Utile. That ship was named Providence, meaning protection of God. But hope was not for all. After 2 months, they completed the boat, large enough to carry a group of people back to the mainland. And then, the cruel decision was made: only the French sailors would be allowed on board, and all 60 black slaves would be left behind with the empty promise, "We will come back for you." But no one came back. Not because the conditions did not allow it, but because no one wanted to recall a wrongdoing, the illegal slave trade, which was absolutely banned by the colonial government at that time. Castellan, the deputy commander who had directed the construction of the camp on the island and the construction of the escape boat, was the only one who could not rest easy. He repeatedly sent petitions convincing the authorities in Mauritius to organize a rescue mission. But the response was only cold head shaking. The authorities believed that returning to Tromelin Island to rescue people would mean admitting that they had violated the ban on the slave trade, and that was unacceptable, especially during a period of political tension between France and England. In addition, the war between the two countries also caused all military resources to be devoted to the front line, leaving no one to care about the people abandoned on a small sand island in the middle of the ocean. 8 years after the shipwreck in 1769, the French East India Company was officially dissolved. The organization that had chartered the Utile no longer existed, and the case was forgotten. The survivors of Tromelin, if any, had disappeared from maps, from records, and from the minds of anyone who had ever known them. But Castellan did not give up. He continued to insist that the French government reopen the case. It was not until 1773, 12 years after the Utile sank, that his appeal began to be heard. The French Navy decided to send an expedition toward Tromelin in the faint hope that there might be survivors. But nothing was easy. A series of violent storms prevented rescue ships from reaching the island. The first attempt failed. The following year, in 1774, they tried again, and failed again. Each failure was another year of life being pushed closer to despair. Until 1776, exactly 15 years after the shipwreck, the French Navy decided to send Captain Jacques-Marie Tromelin, a seasoned man, to lead the final rescue mission. And this time, they succeeded. Tromelin's ship approached and landed on the small island that had been forgotten for nearly 2 decades. When they set foot on the island, no one was sure if anyone would survive. But a miracle happened. On the island at that time, there were 7 women and an 8-month-old baby. They had survived miraculously for 15 years amid white sand and stormy seas, without outside help, without medicine, without information, without justice. Those women were all that remained of the more than 60 lives that had been mercilessly abandoned that year. The rescue was not only a humanitarian victory, but also a powerful wake-up call for France. The people who had been treated as merchandise had proven that they were not just victims. They were living witnesses to the cruelty of colonialism, the ravages of greed, and the complicit silence of an entire political system. Captain Jacques-Marie Tromelin, who had succeeded in the rescue, was inscribed in history. And since then, the tiny island has been renamed from Île des Sables, Sand Island, to Tromelin, to commemorate this rare moment of redemption in a long line of injustices that have lasted for centuries. But even after their rescue, the story of the survivors on Tromelin Island has remained largely unsung. It was not until the 21st century, when archaeologists returned to the island and excavated the remaining sites, that the full truth gradually emerged. Each layer of sand, each piece of pottery, each low stone wall, each hastily carved spoon, all told the story of people once forgotten by the world. After more than 2 centuries of being buried in white sand and forgotten, the mysteries of the 15-year survival on Tromelin Island are finally being revealed. From 2006 to 2013, a team of archaeologists led by Dr. Max Guéroux, a former French naval officer and maritime researcher, conducted 4 large-scale excavations on the island. Their sole goal to find out exactly how the slaves left behind survived in such brutal conditions. By digging through just a few dozen centimeters of sand near the meteorological station built in 1954, the team discovered intact stone foundations, clear traces of structures built by hand 260 years ago. What is surprising is that on an island with absolutely no natural rock, thick walls were built with stone slabs from the southern coast, the only place on the island with rubble. This is evidence that the people left behind did not live in the sand but actively created solid shelters to withstand the storms that regularly swept across the island. The walls are thick and sturdy, with a structure similar to traditional tombs in Madagascar, showing that they were not just temporary shelters but also reflected a part of their indigenous culture. According to Dr. Geru, it is the very fact of having to live in these tomb-like houses that makes many people feel like they are temporarily living in death, a prison between life and loss with no way out. However, that spirit is also a testament to the quiet resilience of those abandoned by the world. There are no forests, no wood, so how do they make fire? The answer lies in the black charcoal and ash found next to the areas that used to be cooking areas. The wood for the fire was determined to have come from the wreck of the ship. The broken planks masts and wooden barrels that drifted from the utile were the only source of energy for them to cook boil water and keep warm during the cold night. They made the most of everything left from the shipwreck, turning useless things into vital elements. Among the artifacts found there were about 15 wooden spoons, a seemingly small but very valuable detail. These spoons not only prove that they still maintained organized living habits, but also show their efforts to preserve human dignity in harsh conditions. In addition, archaeologists also discovered ceramic bowls used to collect rainwater, showing that they had found a way to create their own source of drinking water, the only and most precious on this riverless island. Notably, among the archaeological artifacts were some primitive jewelry for women crafted from shells and scrap metal from the ship. This shows that even when abandoned, the women still tried to maintain their individual identity and self-respect as a way to preserve their humanity in a place where human rights were completely denied. And what about food? Initially, everyone thought that living in the middle of the sea fish must be the main source of food. But the survey of animal bones at the settlements gave a surprising result. Fish bones only accounted for about 3% of the total bones found. According to Dr. Geru's explanation, it is very likely that this group of survivors came mainly from the inland region of Madagascar, who had no experience in fishing in the sea. Moreover, they did not have nets, fishing rods, or any tools for offshore fishing. Going to sea with bare hands was almost impossible. Instead, their main source of protein came from seabirds, especially the black-backed albatross. More than 90% of the animal bones on the island came from these birds. Analysis of severed wing bones and grill marks suggests that they systematically hunted and processed seabirds. These birds visited Tromelin seasonally, from July to January, and became a natural periodic supply for them. However, the most important and abundant food source was sea turtles. Tromelin was a turtle breeding ground, and from November to April, hundreds of individuals came ashore to lay eggs. The archaeological team estimates that during their 15 years of abandonment, the survivors hunted about 400 turtles, 90,000 seabirds, and 2,500 fish, enough to sustain them seasonally as long as they survived the harshest transitional period of May-June, when neither birds nor turtles were present on the island. Finally, the big question that many people have always asked: was there any violence, fighting, or even cannibalism during the 15 years of isolation? The answer is no. Experts have carefully examined all the human and animal bones found on the island. There is no sign of killing, torture, or cannibalism. There is no internal conflict, no cracks in the community. Instead, there is cooperation, sharing, and organizing activities like a miniature society, albeit neglected and without any guidance. The story of Tromelin Island is not only a tragedy of abandoned people, but also a shocking testament to the strong vitality and indomitable dignity of human beings. despite being forgotten by the world they lived, fought and maintained their humanity until the last minute. What do you think about 15 years of survival on a deserted island? No violence, no despair, only will and faith. Leave a comment below and share your perspective. Don't forget to follow the channel so you don't miss out on fascinating, mysterious stories that have never been revealed in the world.